Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It's called fake news, and it permeates social media with a vengeance. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The mass shooting at the concert in Las Vegas has left nearly 60 people dead and more than 500 injured. But there was another casualty, the truth. It is 64-year-old Stephen Paddock, who law enforcement authorities have identified as the shooter. But within hours, far-right bloggers and news sites identified Gary Danley as the shooter, who was described as a left-wing loon. Meanwhile, Mary Lou Danley is considered a person of interest and has been identified as having been married to Gary, and rumors spread that she had been present at the concert and told the audience that they were about to die. She was actually out of the country at the time of the shooting. Finally, commentators on social media insisted there must have been more than one gunman involved in the attack. Take a look at the rise of social media. In our studio this morning is Jennifer Cox, Associate Professor of Communications at Salisbury University, and Jeremy Cox, who is a reporter for the Salisbury Daily Times. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So let me start with you, Jennifer. Taking a look at social media and the spread of all kinds of crazy ideas, and we'll get into some of the politics in a minute. What do you make of that? Is there some way to rein it in? Is there what kind of impact do you think this is having, as opposed to say what we had, say, maybe 10 or 20 years ago?
Social media has obviously had a huge impact on society, on the way we communicate, in general, on the way that news gets spread. And fake news isn't a new thing. It's been around as long as news has been around, basically, since the beginning of time. But certainly, social media has played a huge role in the pervasiveness of it, how quickly it spreads. The way that I teach my students is that social media, whatever you post on social media is like toothpaste. If you squeeze it out, you can't put it back in the tube. And that's kind of what we're dealing with here. You know, I've attended a social media conference a couple years ago, and one of the tips that they gave for when you post something incorrectly, as news organizations do, that you shouldn't just delete the tweet or delete the post. What you should do is actually acknowledge it, take a screenshot of it, and then say, this was incorrect, here's the correct info. Acknowledge the breach, so to speak. And that's a better way to kind of add some transparency and to try and spread a message. Because once something's out there, people have seen it. We don't have a Men in Black delete button. And so we have to acknowledge when we make a mistake in the news industry, as we saw a lot of news outlets did with this. And then even with Tom Petty's death this week, we had a similar situation. And so it's the best and only strategy is really to acknowledge it and try to make corrections and try to get the real news out there.
Well, one of the things that struck me is that I was trying to think about the comparison, say, with the early years of the Republic, which you had lots of publications which were not actually newspapers, now we know it, but rather they were owned by political parties or individuals. They spread all kind of scurrilous gossip about each other, including the Founding Fathers. But you did have a sense about who they were. I mean, where they were coming from. It seems to me with social media, particularly, especially certainly for Twitter, but even Facebook, this stuff gets passed around very quickly, that you're not even sure where it's coming from. I mean, that seems to be one of the big differences.
Absolutely about social media. Even with political advertising, newspapers, television, when political organizations advertise there, they have to, say there has to be a tagline, paid for by the committee to reelect, whatever. And that right now on the internet is not the case. So these ads that you're seeing on Facebook, no one knows where they're coming from, and that in fact foreign powers now we're finding are exploiting that loophole with Facebook now turning over. How big was the ad buy?
It's
$100,000.
3,000 ads believed to be linked to Russian election interference. Yeah.
Right. And so the Russians bought some ads on Facebook to try to sow divisions in the black community and drum up anti-Muslim
Gun
sentiment.
control, immigration, racism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In order, right before the election, in several battlegrounds like Michigan and Iowa. And so that's where we're at right now. And, I don't know if Congress will act or Facebook will act, but no one seems to be leading the charge right now.
Well, Facebook is acting. They've recently they're planning some disclosure agreements and things like that. But the bottom line here is that we need to be more savvy news consumers. And Don, you had said people don't see, or they can't really tell, and it's true. I actually was looking and saw some studies that indicated that people can't tell or don't distinguish between sponsored content or paid content and real news. The same is true with partisan politics. I actually saw posts yesterday about a divisive issue, and I looked at it and I said, I don't know this publication. What is this? And I just did something simple. I Googled it, and it was a completely partisan issue, and so it was only being published in partisan publications, which made me go, I don't know if this is credible or not. So it's actually pretty easy to tell if you just look at the publication what they stand for, but people just don't take that time. We read headlines, we read tweets, we don't really consider the source, which is a really big problem.
So do you think that, we're talking about like the Russians, what do you think this does then to the body politic in terms of massaging it and shifting its views? I mean, I know I'm just about done with Hillary Clinton's book, and one of the things she remarks about is the fact that, as you point out, there were a lot of ads that were bought, particularly in some of the key states she obviously lost. Obviously, more factors than just that involved in her loss. But that they were able to shape this image of her. She talks about how email was like the most associated word with her name, as opposed to, say, Donald Trump. That there seems to be something going on in terms of shaping the political mind.
And there's certainly been a lot of division over how big a role social media played in the election. But according to the American people, CNN just released a poll that said 54% of Americans believe Russian interference on social media played a role in Donald Trump winning the election. In the days before the election, there was a study that showed false election stories and hoax sites and hyperpartisan blogs generated more engagement than content from real news in the last 2 to 3 months of the election. And the vast majority of those were pro-Trump, anti-Hillary. And we just saw news come out from Congress yesterday that there was prevalent fake news being passed around via social media in those swing states that did end up winning the election for Donald Trump. So to anyone who says that it wasn't an influential factor, there's too much evidence to suggest that it was.
Yeah, just a cursory, scroll through, Twitter will, show you that it continues to happen. Every day I try to follow about 2,000 people from all walks of life, and, hardly, one screen goes by where there isn't someone posting or reposting something that is jumps out as fake news, but, it rings true because they're maybe hyper-partisan person to begin with, and wow, can you believe this? And then there'll be a link, and no, actually I can't. And I've actually once in a while I'll actually jump in there and be, well, no, this is fake news. Right here is a screenshot from on the site under the about section. Some of them have taken actually writing, this is meant for satire only. My favorite is the one, here's what Leonardo DiCaprio has to say about the residents of Salisbury. Wow.
That's been popping up a lot. Yeah.
I didn't know that he cared about us. Or the other one, Miley Cyrus is you'll never guess why she's buying a house in Annapolis, Maryland. So I look forward to her moving there. I assume that'll work out well. But it's so much easier. The model is so broken, and that it's so much easier. It costs basically no money to post this because obviously you're not doing any reporting, and people are more likely to click on it because you're not bounded by truth. So that going up against something like journalism, which costs a lot of money and is, I'm sorry to say, less interesting than stuff you can just make up a lot of times. it's really an unfair playing field, and trying to get those two matched up again, if not get rid of the fake one, it's going to be incredibly hard from a capitalistic standpoint to take care of.
Yeah, it's absolutely not going to work unless people want it to. I mean, there are emerging tools such as Google Chrome just put out a media bias fact check tool that you can actually put in your browser. There's another one called BS Detector. But
I've got one of those.
Yeah, right. But the point is that people have to want to distinguish between fake news and real news. But the bottom line is that most people seek out the news that reaffirms what they already think. So if I am a hyper-partisan person, I'm only going to seek out the news that says, see, this proves my point. And I'm just leading myself down that path. So unless we as informed citizens want the truth, it's going to be way too easy to fool us. And we've seen that on social media.
So what do you make of stories that seem completely outrageous? And the thing that comes to mind, of course, is the attack on the pizza place, in which there was some meme about how that Hillary Clinton was running some kind of child, sexual thing going on, and the guy goes down with a gun. I mean, how is it that, it seems so beyond the pale that one wouldn't even believe. How is it that people get sucked into believing that? Something so far out of the
audience effects.
Yeah, well, we don't, as consumers of any type of communication, we don't think with our minds, we think with our emotions. And so in that case, there were people that hated Hillary Clinton so much that they wanted to believe those things and wanted to spread that kind of news. And unfortunately, that's, again, not a new thing, but just social media is a tool that just makes spreading that message so much easier, as you said.
Amplifies it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Pizzagate was, there was even a guy who went and stormed the pizza place and as a vigilante, and literally, it's just like a random pizza place, like when you get down to it, and it was a real visceral example, I think, from this last election cycle of how you can really weaponize things that are part of the American way of life against us. I think that's really the way you got to think about it.
Yeah, actually, there's reports that now the latest Russian social media invasion has had to do with the NFL debate, the kneeling debate, and they're actually posting things on both sides saying, hashtag kneel together, hashtag stand together. And really, they don't care about the NFL. They're just trying to sow division, and it's working because we are just so eager to seek out anything that says that we're right.
Right. Vladimir Putin's modus operandi this whole time has been, well, America thinks it's so perfect. They sit on their in their their ivory tower or what have you, and they're not so great. So he doesn't care so much about specific outcomes, just as long as we make ourselves look bad. And I think
we've succeeded there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but again, weaponizing our institutions against us has proved to be frighteningly easy, and laws and protocol have not kept up with that.
Well, I'm reminded of, and in the early part of the Republic, it was John Adams had an issue with the French. And as a matter of fact, the French were influencing whether or not the United States should ally itself with one or another countries in terms of the British and so on. And there you had an outside influence, right? A foreign country doing that. But since then, until this moment, countries have not been all that successful, and now suddenly we've got this open gate. Now we have the French and the Dutch, for example, who apparently have been able to fend this off. The Germans apparently so. Is there something to be learned from them in terms of limiting the influence of this kind of thing?
I'm not a scholar in it, but I have been reading about the latest Russian interference, and there, as we kind of hinted at the outset, it isn't new. The Soviet Union would buy newspaper advertisements and host, or at least launder it to have meetings, rallies held in America. And I think that was, again, kind of a precursor of what we see today. But, the modes of media were different back then that kind of kept them from having as wide an impact. A newspaper might be widely read in a community, but it doesn't have a worldwide reach. Now anybody with an internet connection has a worldwide reach, to either their own URL or through Facebook. So again, you see this amplifying, this multiplicative effect, where these, again, age-old methods and ideas and ways of subverting our government and our dialogue have now found better root from which to grow.
Yeah, and I can't speak specifically to why or if Europe has been successful, more successful than the U.S., but it could have something to do with the differences in culture. I mean, the U.S. is a very individualistic country. We prize our own personal beliefs over the beliefs of the collective whole. And I don't know that that's as prevalent in Europe, just again, based on kind of my limited experience with travel and culture there. There does seem to be more of a collectivist attitude in a lot of those European countries that might suggest that there's less of a desire to prove the self right, but more of to do right for the whole or for a greater population.
How much do you think this sort of, I mean, it doesn't really start there, but the birther movement, the idea that President Obama wasn't born in the country, and that this was a meme that kind of got spread, and obviously Donald Trump made a great deal of it, perhaps his political fortunes on it. And I remember I was talking to my brother who had gotten this email from a friend of his, fairly educated guy, talking about, well, there were all these discrepancies in the email and in the birth certificate. Is that part of the equation? Or does that represent the shift that's going on in terms of believing what you want, and a lot of people just, you know what I mean?
It's certainly frightening how rational people can take issue with things like this, how they don't, how they are so willing to believe something that's blatantly untrue. And I guess part of it too is the nature of social media is kind of a show me medium anyway. I constantly tell my students, don't just tweet, there's a car accident, take a picture and post that out there. Don't just show me that, don't say it was a bad car accident, show me a picture of it, let me make up my mind. And, I don't know that, I think when you get to higher levels of security, of national security, you can't just take a picture of the president's birth certificate and send it out via social media. And so I think people are used to, well, if I can't see it, it's not real. Another thing too is that we are not very savvy when it comes to manipulated photos and images and videos, which is something that social media has actually been able to help a lot of savvy journalists with. People will send in a photo and say, look at this mass shooting in this area, and then the photographer analyst can take a look at it and say, well, they said this took place at noon, but the sun is clearly in a different spot. And there's a street corner here that there's a crack on the sidewalk, but this picture doesn't have that crack. And they can really use it as detectives, but we as average citizens, we don't really have that kind of time or ability.
Yeah, we used to say, and I think this was, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but in political discourse that you're entitled to your own set of opinions, but not your own facts. And the whole idea of fake news by those who create it and spread it is to muddy the waters around what are facts. So now that, as when the birther situation that you brought up, even there, well, you're not entitled to your own facts. I have my own facts, or as Kellyanne Conway would call it, alternative facts.
As a matter of fact, and it just strikes me that there is a skepticism now, both on the right and the left, to what is accepted, whether it comes from the government or whether it comes from mainstream media. Now, a lot of it grows out of the disillusionment, certainly of the 1960s, both on the right and the left, obviously with Kennedy assassination and the war in Vietnam, and of course the Watergate and so on, seems to be the foundation in which distrust of both government and perhaps even mainstream media seems to have occurred. I mean, is this something that just is inherent or has sort of grown inside of the body politic that you're not going to be able to get rid of it? Because it seems to me that a lot of the beliefs and some of the crazy ideas we've been talking about, that's based on the idea that, well, we don't believe, as he points out, we don't believe that what we're being told is true.
It's interesting. You brought up. I was thinking about this the other day. You brought up Watergate. I wonder how that would play out right now. It's
It is in a
yeah.
way.
I mean, it's interesting.
Russiagate.
Yeah, because it's like we're not talking about clandestine meetings in parking garages now. We're talking about. I mean, would Nixon have been exposed so much sooner thanks to social media, or would he have been able to, and his PR machine have been able to effectively shut it down or make it a non-issue?
The
By
failing
rallying,
Washington Post.
yeah, by rallying his supporters. I'd be curious to see how that goes. And you're right. I think we are kind of living in that situation right now.
Yeah. Counterfactual games are fun. But no, Watergate was a high point in America's trust in the media. And, there's been some up and downs, but the overall trend has been, that we distrust our media. I think we're slightly better than Congress, but below pretty much every other institution out there. And I'll be the first to say that we, media, deserve some of that blame by, things like what we saw the other day with reporting on, Tom Petty's death, where one outlet reports it and everyone piles on instead of doing their own reporting. And then you have fake news spreading. And I think you could speak to this, but our objective third person, point of view where we try to write with authority kind of clashes against people's desires, since, especially as you mentioned, since the 1960s, Don, to question authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually something I've been exploring, and I'm in the process of working on a book proposal on, is this idea of journalists becoming kind of part of the story, trying to break down this barrier of objectivity, to say that journalists can literally remove their brains and tell a story completely without bias or without influence is kind of ridiculous. Yeah, and who wants to read that story anyway, right? I mean, the stories that do well tend to be the ones that have some sort of a component where the storyteller has a passion. That doesn't mean that we should lean toward all opinionated writing or getting back to the partisan press or anything like that. But this idea that journalists can emerge in the story, be kind of part of the experience, and then be able to tell a fuller truth. I think that kind of reporting builds trust. It builds transparency. It shows transparency, and it really gives us a more fulfilling experience as an audience to see the reporter kind of really dive in and tell a story in depth. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that newsrooms are shrinking and these things take time. But I'm optimistic that we're going to get back to some good. That this is a real test for journalism right now, to a real challenge, because this is a problem on the media and it's a problem on its consumers. So the media rushed to tell the story of Tom Petty dying and then not dying and dying, and that went back and forth. And as you said, they got complacent and they cited other organizations saying, hey, it's their fault, it's not ours if we get it wrong. I mean, NPR did that with Gabby Giffords, and several followed suit, and so we've seen this happen before. But the fact is, there's a premium on being the first, and always has been, to break news. But the reason that there is that premium is because people are impatient, right? We can't wait for the facts. We can't wait for it to be right.
And it's your fault.
Yeah, but I'm saying, until consumers can be patient, or can accept that, we'll get you the story when we have it, the news media are going to keep responding to that need for immediacy. So, it's just going to be a constant cycle. And social media makes it that much worse because it is so immediate.
Let me ask you, how much do you think social media ultimately has influenced what we consider to be mainstream media? I've gone to press conferences, press conventions where they talk about how, well, okay, we'll follow stuff on social media. For them in the all news stations, particularly in Baltimore and Washington, but they said, but we're not going to report it until we can make sure that it's right, which is, I guess, the right way to go. But it seems as if there's a lot of stuff that seeps in one fashion or another.
Well, I'm sure you could say this as well, Don, but just the arc of our own careers. When I started as a reporter down with the Naples Daily News in January 2002, my job was to spend the day reporting a story, even if it was a breaking story, something that we would normally be shouting out, as soon as we learned about it. I reported it, and then at 5 o'clock I turned it in, and I waited until the next morning when it came out. And we did have a website, but it didn't push through until about, minute after midnight. And then about, 2005, we started pushing out more to the internet, which meant that, okay, we would update it there, but we had no way of telling people beyond that, hey, there's this thing that we wrote. And then 2007, 2008, 2009 come along with Twitter and Facebook, and now we have this other method. And now, instead of 5 o'clock being my deadline, literally every minute is a deadline. So I apologize. Some people, watching on the camera can see I'm still checking my phone, like, okay, I got to make sure there's nothing. I mean, you're never off now.
Right.
You talk about change in workflow.
Yeah, it's funny because we worked in the same newsroom, and I remember the days when it was like, don't tell the online people about this story. We don't want to scoop ourselves.
Yeah.
Literally, we would say, we don't want to scoop ourselves. Which is so dumb now, thinking back.
We fought so hard, like, oh my God, you're going to make me do extra work now? Ugh.
And we would literally hide news from the online people who were just across the newsroom from us, thinking, like, if it went on the web, then TV could get it, and they could get it out before us.
Yeah.
Because we didn't think people were reading the online version.
So you wait until 5:05.
Right. Yeah, we try to be deceptive with our time. And now it's like, no, you don't wait. You get it out there every minute as soon as you can. And
Husband and wife, by the way. I don't know.
That's right.
Journalism, Salisbury power couple.
That's right.
Get that out there.
I'll be sure to remind people that. So I mean, because this push to get things out, it seems as if it somehow has been so accelerated to the point where it's not that, for instance. Well, one of the things that struck me is that. We have, we're talking about fake news and points of view and so on. And one of the things that has struck me is that we may have been reduced to people from one side and then the other side and making various claims, right? I mean, we saw a lot of that, particularly during the presidential campaign, in which I remarked to people that, particularly the Trump surrogates, they were oftentimes I don't know how many times I saw an anchor have to say, no, that's not true, right? I've never seen anything quite like that, in which there's this balance, as opposed to talking about reporting, in which you go out, you interview a bunch of people, and you try to figure out what's going on. I mean, we lost something in this idea of, well, we're going to have balance, so we're going to have this person, and maybe we'll correct something that somebody said, but in the end, it's caveat emptor.
Yeah, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, the Trump supporters will say, well, the media's got it against Trump. And then Trump does a whole bunch of things that either break with norms of the past in the presidency, or does things that are just kind of bad from an optics standpoint, like, throwing paper towels at hurricane victims in Puerto Rico. The media says, hey, this is kind of weird, that a president would do this. And then, here it just self-fulfills that whole, oh, there goes the media again, criticizing Trump, they're against him and all this, and biased and whatnot. And it's really, Trump couldn't exist, I think, without that playing field being ready for him to then run out on here in 2016, 2017.
Yeah, the media have certainly become a convenient scapegoat, and we always really have been. I mean, it's always been tough to be a journalist because you work diligently to represent both sides of a story and to tell the facts, to tell the truth, and then you're still the bad guy. It's like, don't shoot the messenger. But but it always has been that way. And one of the things that I try to teach my students is that, look, you're not getting into this for the money. You're not getting into this business to make friends. You're getting into this business to keep people informed, people who want to be informed, and to make a difference, and to help them to make a difference. And as long as there are still people like that, I don't think that this hyper-partisan prevalence of news is going to live forever. I think that we're still going to see the fundamentals of journalism win out the day at some point, and that we're going to, that if we keep telling these good stories, if we keep telling the truth, if we keep having balance, and then we also keep our mission to fact check, to be the watchdogs of our leaders in society, that eventually, hopefully, people will come around. The people who are going to come around. Another problem with social media is that it's not a great platform for discourse. I don't engage ever. Well, I'm a journalist, so I wouldn't do this anyway, but I never engage in political debate on Facebook or Twitter. It's not an appropriate platform for it. And unfortunately, most of the people who are engaged in these debates are people who are absolutely not going to change their minds anyway. So you have these very visceral, very ugly debates, and people unfriending each other, losing friends, and it's just it's not worth it. It's not helpful.
Are you willing
You're
to
not
die
gonna
on that
change
hill?
Yeah, it's not. It's not going to change anyone's mind. And I say this on both sides. I have friends on both sides who will post these things, and I'm like, what are you hoping to accomplish with this? You're not going to change my mind. You're not. It's certainly not in 140 characters. And so it's until we start having some more of these face-to-face conversations, there's just going to be people who are going to live and die by social media and just looking for what they want to find and posting it. And then hopefully there will be a greater population who will go and actually seek the truth and not engage.
Jeremy, do you share the optimism that the idea that the fake news era, in terms of people not believing and so on, which seems certainly to have been given to a height there with Donald Trump, you think that we're going to phase out of this, or is this something you think that's going to be part of us for a long time?
I'm heartened that the same mechanisms that led to the problem in the first place are now starting to spin toward a solution here. That this is a country of free dialogue and open discussion, and now you're seeing a conversation, not unlike this one, about what do we do to fix it. It does seem like the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, this has their attention. He seems to be taking it, if not as seriously as he should be, at least more serious than he did back in last November. And you're seeing some talk on Capitol Hill about what to do about it. And you're seeing, the media talk about it, and even some individuals beyond it. Like, I'm tired of being duped. I was searching for one particular example of fake news yesterday, and on my Google search, it was the number 2 hit, but the number 4th search return was the one debunking it. And I think that's progress.
Yeah, I was just reminded. I was pulling up the article because I saw this yesterday. Reuters just released a poll that indicates that trust in the media is rising. According to this Reuters poll,
What?
Yeah, I know, right? It's weird.
There you go, Don.
The percentage of adults who said they have great deal or some confidence in the press rose to 48% in September, up from 39% last November, around the time of the elections. So. Hope, progress, perhaps.
Springs eternal.
And I think you're right. I think people are tired of being duped. I think we're tired of being made to feel like suckers. And I hope that more people take that attitude and approach and start being more cautious. Tuesday was News Engagement Day across the country, and I had posted a couple things about how to detect fake news and how you should look at breaking news and be cautious about it. And overwhelmingly, some of my most popular posts. I mean, people want to know these things. They want these tips.
And you're hosting a
I was actually just going to plug our event. So actually, the three of us, Don, Jeremy, and I, along with a representative from WMDT, are going to be on a fake news panel where we'll be doing workshops, and that'll be at Salisbury University on November 14th. At 6:30, and we're going to be looking at a lot of these issues. And so far, from what we've heard, we're expecting a couple hundred people potentially, because this is something that people want. They not only do they want to hear about this issue, they want to know how to stop it. And so one of the things that we're actually going to be doing is doing computer stickers, and I have a list here of tips for detecting fake news, because people want them and they want them accessible. So you can actually take the sticker, put it on your computer, and have it as a reminder. People want this, and that makes me optimistic.
We're going to be speaking with Jennifer Cox. She's an assistant professor of communications at Salisbury University. Also, Jeremy Cox, who is a reporter for the Salisbury Daily Times, and they are married, as we mentioned a moment ago. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks, Don.
Pleasure.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Frank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.